You won't believe what happened when my HOA's Karen tried to sabotage me, but she had no idea it would end with her in handcuffs. Before we dive into today's story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so we can keep bringing you amazing stories like this one. Living in a peaceful suburban neighborhood should have been a dream, but dealing with Karen, the HOA president, turned it into a nightmare. She had a reputation for being a control freak, enforcing rules that didn't exist, issuing fines for minor infractions, and making life miserable for anyone who dared to challenge her authority. At first, I tried to ignore her, thinking she was just a busybody with too much time on her hands. But over time, I realized she thrived on making life difficult for homeowners who didn't fall in line. The neighborhood group chat was filled with stories about her unreasonable demands. One neighbor got a fine because his porch light was the wrong shade of white. Another was cited for having a garden gnome that was apparently not in line with HOA aesthetics. If there was an inconvenience to be had, Karen would find a way to enforce it. I had already clashed with her before. She didn't like that my grass was half an inch too high and once accused my trash bins of being left out too long when they were out for less than an hour. She even tried to enforce a rule about what kind of car colors were appropriate for the neighborhood. One guy with a bright yellow Mustang got multiple complaints from her, even though there was nothing in the bylaws against it. But this time, things escalated beyond petty rule enforcement. It all started when I decided to repave my driveway. My old driveway had cracks, and rather than waiting for the HOA's slow and overpriced contractor, I hired my own. I double-checked city regulations, property lines, and permits. Everything was in order. I even confirmed with a real estate attorney that my driveway was considered private property and not subject to HOA jurisdiction. As soon as the work crew showed up, Karen was on my property within minutes, marching over like she owned the place, arms crossed, that signature scowl of hers plastered on her face. "You can't do this," she snapped, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the workers unloading their equipment. I raised an eyebrow. "Pretty sure I can. It's my property. Not without HOA approval," she shot back, her voice dripping with authority she didn't actually have. I calmly explained that my driveway was not under HOA jurisdiction. I had checked property records, and the HOA had no say over driveways in our section of the neighborhood. Karen, of course, refused to believe me. "We have rules," she huffed. "You can't just go making changes however you want. It disrupts the uniformity of the neighborhood." I sighed, realizing this was going to be an argument no matter what I said. "Look, if you have an issue, you can take it up with the city because they already approved it." Karen's face turned red with frustration, but she wasn't used to people standing up to her. After a few more minutes of heated discussion, she stomped off, muttering something about not allowing this in her neighborhood. I figured that was the end of it. I should have known better. The driveway was completed a few days later, and I was happy with the results. It was smooth, looked great, and best of all, I didn't have to deal with the HOA's outrageous fees. My neighbors even complimented the work, saying they were considering repaving their own driveways, which I knew would infuriate Karen. But Karen wasn't the type to take being ignored lightly. She had to have the last word, and she wasn't about to let me get away with what she saw as a challenge to her authority. The next morning, I woke up, got ready for work, and walked out to my car. The moment I backed up, I heard a sickening thunk, 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 followed by a loud hissing noise. My car wobbled, and I slammed on the brakes. Confused, I stepped out, and my heart nearly stopped. Someone had installed metal spike strips at the entrance of my driveway, the kind used in parking garages and high-security areas to prevent people from driving in the wrong direction. And they were drilled directly into the pavement. All four of my tires, completely shredded. At first, I just stood there in shock, my brain struggling to process what I was looking at. Who would do something like this? Was this some kind of prank? But then, I heard a voice from across the street. "Maybe next time, you'll follow the rules," Karen called out from her porch, sipping her coffee with the smuggest look I had ever seen. I turned to face her, fury boiling in my chest. "Are you kidding me? You did this." "It's called neighborhood enforcement," she said with a shrug. "No unauthorized driveway modifications. This is what happens when you think you're above the HOA." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This is private property. You have no right to do this." She just smirked. Well, maybe if you had listened to me, this wouldn't have happened. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger in check. This wasn't just an inconvenience. This was destruction of property. Thousands of dollars in damage. I took a deep breath, pulling out my phone. Oh, this is going to be fun, I muttered as I snapped pictures of the spike strips. I made sure to capture the bolts, the way they were drilled into the driveway, the angle at which they sat. I walked around my car, documenting every destroyed tire. And then, I turned my camera toward Karen. She wasn't so smug now. Are you recording me? She demanded. Yep, I said casually. And guess what? You just admitted to what you did. That's criminal damage to property, and I'd say this qualifies as malicious intent. Her expression faltered for the first time. You wouldn't? Oh, I absolutely would. Karen turned on her heel and stormed back inside, slamming the door. But the damage was done, both to my car and to her. She thought she was untouchable, that her title as HOA president gave her unlimited power. She was about to find out just how wrong she was. Karen thought she could get away with everything. She had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years, and people either caved in or avoided conflict altogether. But this time, she messed with the wrong person. I wasn't just going to let it slide. The moment I had all my evidence, the pictures of the spike strips, my shredded tires, and the video of Karen openly admitting to what she had done, I knew exactly what to do next. First, I called a tow truck and had my car taken to the nearest repair shop. The damage was extensive. 4 completely destroyed tires, scratches along the undercarriage, and even some rim damage from the sheer force of the spikes. The mechanic gave me an estimate of nearly $2,000, and I was furious. But I wasn't the one who was going to be paying for it. While waiting for the tow, I called the police. I explained the situation in detail, making it clear that this was not just some minor HOA dispute. This was premeditated property damage. The dispatcher sounded surprised at the severity of the issue and assured me that an officer would be sent out. Within 20 minutes, a patrol car pulled up in front of my house. The officer, a middle-aged man with a no-nonsense demeanor, listened carefully as I walked him through what happened. I showed him the pictures and played the video of Karen smugly admitting to installing the spike strips. His expression darkened as he took notes. This isn't just an HOA matter, he said, shaking his head. This is criminal mischief and destruction of property. Possibly even reckless endangerment if we can prove she knew it could cause harm. That was music to my ears. The officer walked over to Karen's house and knocked firmly on her door. It took a full minute before she finally opened it, and when she saw the cops standing there, her entire demeanor shifted. Gone was the smug, power-drunk HOA president. Now, she looked nervous. Ma'am, the officer began, we need to have a word about the incident regarding the spike strips on your neighbor's driveway. Karen's face paled, but she quickly tried to regain control of the situation. Oh, officer, this is just a misunderstanding. I was simply enforcing the HOA regulations. The officer held up a hand. That's not how this works. The HOA does not have legal authority to install hazardous road spikes on private property. And based on the evidence I've seen, you've caused significant damage. Karen's eyes darted between me and the officer, panic creeping into her voice. But I was just following protocol. He didn't get approval for his driveway. That doesn't matter, the officer said sternly. What does matter is that you intentionally installed a dangerous obstruction, which directly led to thousands of dollars in damage. That's a crime, ma'am. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. She was realizing she wasn't going to talk her way out of this. I decided to twist the knife a little. Oh, and by the way, I added, crossing my arms, you do realize that spike strips are considered prohibited road hazards under state law, right? You didn't just damage my property. You created a road hazard that could have hurt someone. What if my wife had driven out with our kids in the car? The officer's expression hardened even more. He's right. If someone had been injured, this would be a felony charge. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For the first time since I'd met her, she had nothing to say. Then came the best part. Ma'am, I need you to step outside, the officer said firmly. Her eyes widened. Wait, what? You're being detained for questioning regarding criminal property damage, he explained. If the investigation confirms the evidence we've been presented, you could be facing misdemeanor or felony charges. I could barely contain my satisfaction as Karen sputtered in disbelief. You can't arrest me. I'm the HOA president. The officer sighed, clearly unimpressed. And that doesn't put you above the law. Now, are you coming quietly, or do I need to escalate this? Karen finally realized she had no choice. She stepped outside, hands shaking as the officer guided her toward the patrol car. The entire street was watching by this point. Neighbors peeking through curtains, a couple stepping outside to see what the commotion was. The HOA tyrant, the woman who had bullied this neighborhood for years, was being taken in for questioning right in front of everyone. And that's when the whispers started. She finally got what she deserved, one neighbor muttered. I can't believe she thought she could get away with that, another said, shaking her head. One of my other neighbors, an older man named Tom, actually walked over to me and clapped me on the back. You finally took her down, huh? He chuckled. Good for you. She's been terrorizing this place for too long. I was starting to realize just how hated Karen truly was. I knew she was disliked, but I had assumed most people just put up with her. Now, I was seeing firsthand just how many people had been waiting for someone to finally stand up to her. As Karen sat fuming in the back of the patrol car, the officer came back to me. We're going to take her in for questioning. Given the evidence you've provided, I'd say you have a solid case. If you want to press charges, now's the time to say so. I didn't hesitate. Oh, I absolutely want to press charges. The officer nodded. Then we'll take care of the rest. Karen shouted something unintelligible from the back of the car, but I barely paid attention. She was finally facing real consequences for her actions, and I was going to make sure she didn't get out of this easily. But there was still one more thing to take care of, the HOA itself. If Karen had done this to me, what else had she done to other people? How much money had she wrongfully fined homeowners? How many bogus complaints had she filed? It was time to go after the HOA itself. With Karen in the back of a police car, my immediate battle was won, but I wasn't done. She had spent years abusing her power as HOA president, and this wasn't just about me. This was about everyone in the neighborhood she had harassed, fined, and intimidated. Now that she was finally facing legal trouble, I saw the perfect opportunity to take down the entire corrupt HOA she had been running like a dictatorship. I started by reaching out to my neighbors. I knew many of them had their own horror stories about Karen. Unfair fines, threats of foreclosure over minor infractions, and ridiculous HOA rules that seemed to change on Karen's whims. I knocked on doors, sent emails, and gathered people in a private group chat. Within a few hours, I had over 30 homeowners who were more than ready to fight back. The stories poured in. One neighbor, Lisa, had been fined $500 for having a flower bed that wasn't HOA approved. Another, Jake, had received a violation notice because his car was parked an inch over his driveway line. A retired couple, the Andersons, had been threatened with legal action because their Christmas lights were up 2 days past the HOA's deadline. And then there was Greg. His story sealed the deal. Greg, a single father, had nearly lost his home because of Karen's corruption. He had been fined for landscaping violations despite following every rule in the book. When he challenged it, the HOA increased his dues without explanation. When he refused to pay, they slapped a lien on his house. He had to hire a lawyer just to keep his home. That's when I knew this wasn't just about Karen's personal vendettas. This was fraud and extortion. With all this evidence, I contacted a real estate attorney who specialized in HOA abuse cases. I explained everything: Karen's illegal spike strips, the fraudulent fines, the abuse of power. He immediately saw the case potential and advised us to file a class action lawsuit against the HOA. But I had an even bigger plan first. That week, the HOA had its monthly board meeting at the community center. I made sure everyone was there. By the time the meeting started, over 50 homeowners had packed into the room, all of them furious and ready to take a stand. Karen, of course, wasn't there. She was still dealing with her legal troubles. But the rest of the HOA board was, and they looked nervous. I didn't waste time. I stood up, cleared my throat, and projected my voice so everyone could hear. We all know why we're here, I said, holding up a stack of papers. For years, this HOA, our HOA, has been abused by one person's power trip. We've been overcharged, fined for bogus violations, and threatened with lawsuits. Enough is enough. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. I continued. I've spoken with an attorney. We have a case. A class action lawsuit against this HOA for fraudulent fines, financial mismanagement, and abuse of power. And if the board doesn't step down and open the books for a full audit, we will take this to court. Silence. The board members glanced at each other, their faces pale. They knew they were in trouble. Then Greg stood up. We also demand a full vote to remove Karen from the HOA permanently. Even if she gets out of her legal mess, she's never coming back here. That's when the room erupted in cheers. Under immense pressure, the entire HOA board resigned that night. The homeowners voted Karen out, and we elected a new board, one that actually cared about the community. But before they left, we demanded a financial audit. It turned out Karen had been pocketing thousands of dollars in bogus fines. She had been overcharging people and using the excess money to fund her personal expenses, expensive dinners, business trips, and even home renovations. This was embezzlement. We turned the evidence over to the authorities, and suddenly Karen's legal troubles got much worse. With multiple complaints filed against her, Karen's legal troubles only escalated. The police charged her with criminal property damage, reckless endangerment, and now, thanks to the financial audit, embezzlement. My insurance company sued her for the damages to my car, and with a lawsuit against the HOA underway, she had no allies left. But the best part? She was forced to sell her house and move. Without her HOA presidency to protect her, she was just another homeowner. And the moment she racked up violations for unpaid legal fees and lawsuits, she could no longer afford to live in the neighborhood. She fought it, of course. She tried to appeal the charges, claiming she was being targeted unfairly. She even tried blaming the HOA board, saying they had approved all of her actions. But with dozens of witnesses and a mountain of evidence against her, she had no chance. One day, a for sale sign popped up in front of her house. A few weeks later, she was gone for good. And the neighborhood? Better than ever. With a new, fair HOA board in place, we rewrote the rules to prevent another dictatorship from happening. All major decisions had to be voted on by the homeowners. No more bogus fines. No more unfair liens. The new board had to disclose financial reports quarterly. People started fixing up their homes without fear of fines. Families felt safe again. We even hosted a community barbecue to celebrate Karen's departure. And just to add the cherry on top, the new homeowners who moved into Karen's old house, they were some of the nicest people we'd ever met. Karen had thought she was untouchable, but in the end, she destroyed herself. And I made sure she never messed with anyone again.